Emma's footsteps echoed on the polished hospital floor. The fluorescent lights cast a cold, almost surgical glow over the empty hallways. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixed with the faint scent of chloroform that never seemed to leave the place. For weeks now, this had been her daily environment, a sterile world where life and death silently battled. The heavy silence was occasionally broken by the rhythmic beeping of machines, monitoring the slow, steady heartbeats of the patients. The medical devices, tireless, continued marking the rhythm of the lives connected to their circuits. Emma stopped in front of room 208. The silver letters gleamed under the light, and she had already memorized every detail of that small metal plaque. Behind the door, Jonathan Wells, the millionaire businessman who had suffered a strange car accident, lay immersed in a deep sleep from which no one knew if he would wake. In the hallway, everything seemed still, almost in a state of limbo. But inside that room, time was an implacable enemy, moving forward in the absence of any change. Another night, Emma murmured to herself, pushing the door gently, as if afraid of breaking something fragile and irretrievable. Jonathan Wells lay motionless on the bed, his large, robust body reduced to a pale, vulnerable figure. The white sheets covered him up to his chest, and the mechanical sound of the ventilator mixed with the beeps of his heart monitor. His face, usually hardened by years of dealing with the ruthless business world, now appeared harmless, almost unrecognizable, with his beard starting to grow haphazardly. It seemed strange to see him like this, weak, when his presence in financial newspapers had always been so imposing. The accident had shattered him in a way neither money nor fame could fix. By the side of the bed, in a small plastic chair, sat Olivia, his daughter. She was barely 10 years old, but sadness and exhaustion had added something beyond her years to her features. Her golden curls fell messily over her face, which rested on her arm, while her small body curled up under a thin blanket. Emma couldn't stop looking at her. Something about the way the girl slept, like a defenseless puppy, tugged at her heart. Poor thing, Emma thought, feeling a pang inside her. She knew that, although her reasons for worrying about Olivia might seem purely professional, there was something more, something deeper she wasn't willing to fully admit. Emma's recent divorce had left her broken, filled with invisible scars, and caring for Olivia seemed to fill an emotional void that consumed her day by day. Emma quietly approached the girl and covered her with a thicker blanket she had brought from the hospital's storage. She gently stroked Olivia's hair, and a wave of emotions swept over her. Emma wasn't a mother, but in that moment, her protective instinct kicked in almost viscerally. She felt the need to care for the child, to shield her not just from the night's chill but from the cruel and unknown future looming over her. Will I have to tell her one day that her father won't wake up? She wondered in hushed internal whispers, as her fingers continued to softly brush through Olivia's golden strands. But there were no answers. Only the emptiness of uncertainty. Emma sighed. She knew she should leave, but something held her back. It was that growing sense of attachment. In this hospital full of patients, she had developed a special bond with Olivia. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a silent protector, almost as if the girl had chosen Emma as her refuge amidst the chaos. Every night Olivia stayed there, with no close relatives to care for her. Emma made sure the girl was fed, safe, and as comfortable as possible. "You're not alone, little one," she murmured, leaning down to place a soft kiss on Olivia's forehead. The girl didn't stir, and Emma felt a lump in her throat. Loneliness was a cruel enemy, and Olivia knew it far too well for her young age. As Emma looked at Jonathan's face, trying to understand the man behind the headlines, she recalled the night he was brought in. It was a stormy night, the sky had burst into a whirlwind of thunder and lightning, and emergency services were working frantically. Jonathan Wells had been found in his wrecked car on the side of a road on the outskirts of the city. At first, everyone thought it was just a routine car accident, one of those that happen in torrential rain. But something didn't add up. There were no signs of a collision with another vehicle, and the speed he had supposedly been traveling at didn't explain the extent of the damage. Moreover, the doctors had found traces of a strange substance in his system, a type of toxin that didn't match any common medication or recreational drug. "This isn't normal," the doctors had whispered as they reviewed his tests. But there wasn't enough evidence to say so with certainty. Just suspicions. As Emma gazed into Jonathan's lifeless face, she was startled by a noise. She quickly turned towards the door. A tall man, with a serious expression and a slender figure, stood in the doorway, dressed in an immaculate black suit. His dark, penetrating eyes seemed to take in every detail of the room with meticulous control. "Excuse me, who are you?" Emma asked, trying to hide the nervousness caused by the stranger's sudden appearance at such a late hour. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slowly walked towards the foot of Jonathan's bed, observing the monitors with interest. His hands, wrapped in leather gloves, rested crossed in front of his abdomen. "Jonathan Wells," the man murmured, ignoring Emma's question. His tone was soft, but there was something sharp in his voice. "A man who has made more enemies than he can remember." Emma frowned. What kind of comment was that? Who was this man, and what was he doing here? Her protective instinct flared. "You can't be here without authorization." "This is a restricted area," Emma said, more firmly this time. But the man didn't seem fazed. His attention was entirely focused on Jonathan. "Do you know his accident wasn't an accident?" he finally asked, turning towards her. His gaze was cold, but there was something almost amused in his expression. "What do you mean?" Emma responded, feeling the hospital's cold now creeping into her bones. How could he be so sure? The man tilted his head slightly, as if evaluating her reaction. "There's more at stake here than you realize, nurse. This man," he gestured with a slight nod towards Jonathan, "has been playing in a dangerous field. Someone decided his time was up, but they didn't do it right. Someone wanted to make sure he never woke up." Emma stepped back, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. The idea that the accident had been planned, that someone had tried to kill Jonathan, it changed everything. But who would want to do that? And, more importantly, why? "I suggest you be careful," the man continued, his voice now lower, almost a whisper. "There are people who would do anything to finish what they started." Emma felt her heart race. Suddenly, the room seemed smaller, more oppressive. The air grew heavier. But when she tried to say something, the man had already turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving her with a sense of imminent danger. The door closed slowly behind him, and Emma stood in the room, in a silence charged with uncertainty. Outside, the rain began to fall again, beating furiously against the windows. Emma didn't know it yet, but that night would be the beginning of something far bigger than she could ever have imagined. A conspiracy that would endanger not only Jonathan's life, but Olivia's, and her own. Days passed with the same routine at the hospital. Emma cared for Olivia every night, while Jonathan's condition remained stable, but without any clear signs of improvement. The girl had become a constant shadow in Emma's life, increasingly dependent on her presence. Emma didn't mind. Despite the harsh hospital environment, finding someone to care for filled the emotional void left by her divorce. She felt a growing attachment to Olivia, as if caring for her was a second chance to save a broken family. But the apparent peace Emma had found wouldn't last long. One morning, as she walked down the hallway with a cup of coffee in hand, she heard voices coming from room 208. Emma froze when she heard a woman speaking in a strong, commanding tone. She didn't recognize the voice immediately, but something about the tone unsettled her. Approaching the slightly open door, she saw a tall, slender woman, dressed in an elegant beige wool coat, standing next to Jonathan's bed. Her dark hair fell in perfectly styled waves over her shoulders, and her hands were crossed in front of her, holding an expensive handbag. Olivia sat in the corner, watching her warily, her small figure hunched, as if she wanted to disappear into the chair. The woman turned slightly when she noticed Emma standing in the doorway. Her green eyes gleamed with a calculated intensity. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice exuding authority and a hint of disdain. "I haven't seen you here before." Emma felt a mix of nerves and resentment. "I'm the nurse in charge of Jonathan's case," she replied, trying to stay calm as her eyes briefly flickered to Olivia, who was looking at her with pleading eyes. "Ah, I see." The woman smiled, but it was an empty smile, devoid of warmth. "My name is Rachel, I'm a close friend of Jonathan." She paused, as if evaluating Emma's reaction. "I'm here to make sure everything is fine. It seems he's been getting quite a few visitors." Emma didn't need it spelled out, Rachel's tone made it clear she disapproved of her presence, and Olivia's, in the room. The woman didn't need to say it explicitly, she saw Emma as an intruder, someone occupying a space that didn't belong to her. Emma immediately felt on guard. Rachel stepped closer to Jonathan's bed and stroked his hand with a feigned tenderness, her eyes gleaming with a mix of possession and pity. "Poor Jonathan. I can't believe something so horrible happened to you." Emma couldn't help but tense up at those words. Everything about Rachel's presence made her uncomfortable, from her calculating gaze to the way she addressed Jonathan as if she were the only one who had the right to care about him. "Olivia," Rachel suddenly said, turning to the girl with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why don't you come live with me for a while? This isn't a place for a girl your age. You can't stay in a hospital indefinitely." Olivia clutched the arms of the chair more tightly, her eyes seeking Emma's with fear and confusion. Emma felt her heart race as she saw the child's reaction. Olivia didn't trust Rachel, and the only thing keeping her calm in this chaotic situation was Emma's presence. "I think Olivia is fine here for now," Emma said, her voice calm but firm. "She needs to be close to her father. It's what's best for her." Rachel raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a malicious smile. "Do you really think this is the best environment for her? A child needs stability, not to be surrounded by monitors and tubes." Her voice had a dangerous edge. "I know you're doing your job, nurse, but there are things you don't understand." A knot formed in Emma's stomach. She knew she had no legal authority over Olivia, and Rachel, with her domineering attitude, seemed ready to assert any right she could claim. What could Emma do? How could she protect Olivia without the law on her side? As that thought crossed her mind, Rachel leaned over Jonathan's bed, whispering something in his ear, as if she were certain he could hear her. Then she turned and headed toward the door. "I'll make the necessary arrangements for Olivia to come with me," Rachel said as she left, a cold smile on her face. "Don't worry, Jonathan. Everything will go back to normal." After Rachel's visit, the hospital resumed its usual rhythm, but Emma couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. That night, as she cared for Olivia, she noticed the girl was more withdrawn than usual. Emma felt powerless in the face of the possibility that Rachel would take her away. Olivia sat at the edge of the hospital bed, drawing in a notebook. She was sketching a house with a garden, a bright sun, and in the center, a small figure next to a tall one. Emma sat beside her, silently watching the childlike strokes. "Is that your house?" Emma asked, pointing to the drawing. Olivia nodded without looking up. "We used to live in a house like that, with my mom." Those words made Emma pause. She didn't know much about Olivia's mother, only that she had passed away when the girl was very young. Jonathan rarely spoke of her, and Olivia had been living with him ever since. But the mention of her mother, along with Rachel's sudden return, stirred something in the child's heart. "It must have been a beautiful house," Emma said softly, hoping to make Olivia feel comfortable. "It was," the girl murmured, her strokes slowing. "But Dad's never home. He's always working. And now I don't know if he's coming back." Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back with a courage that broke Emma's heart. "Your dad is fighting to come back," Emma said, hugging her gently. don't doubt that for a second. And in the meantime, I'll be here with you." The words echoed in Emma's heart as she spoke them. There was a quiet truth in that promise she couldn't ignore. She was committed to Olivia in a way she hadn't expected at the beginning. It was a bond that pulled her out of her own pain, out of the memories of her failed marriage. Emma's mind drifted briefly to her own past, to those days when her life had been so full of hope. She and her ex-husband, David, had shared dreams of building a family, but everything had fallen apart when reality and expectations collided with the brutality of daily life. David had grown emotionally distant from her, and their separation had been bitter, filled with awkward silences and arguments that seemed to repeat in an endless loop. Now, Emma wasn't just dealing with her personal failure but also with the responsibility of caring for Olivia in the midst of this emotional storm. A few days after Rachel's visit, something changed in the hospital. Emma began to notice small details that unsettled her. First, there were Jonathan's blood tests. The doctors were puzzled because the results continued to show irregularities that couldn't be explained by the car accident alone. Then, a lab technician mentioned in passing that they had found traces of an unusual substance in his system, but they didn't know exactly what it was. Emma, who had overheard this during whispered conversations in the medical staff's break room, felt something stir inside her. She remembered the words of the strange man who had appeared that night. This wasn't an accident. Could it be possible that someone had tried to poison Jonathan? And why? Emma knew Jonathan had enemies in the business world, but the idea of an attempt on his life seemed like something out of a thriller novel, not real life. One afternoon, while reviewing Jonathan's records, Emma noticed something missing in one of the toxicology reports. It was a small but significant detail. The levels of certain substances in his blood didn't match the symptoms he was exhibiting. Something else was going on, something the doctors weren't seeing, or didn't want to see. Emma decided she couldn't stand by idly. She felt a responsibility not only to Jonathan but also to Olivia. If something had happened to Jonathan intentionally, then Olivia could be in danger too. And Rachel, what role did she play in all this? Why had she suddenly reappeared, demanding to take Olivia away? Emma's anxiety grew with every unanswered question. She was certain something dark was looming over the Wells family, and now she had unknowingly become entangled in the storm. Emma wasn't the only one noticing the inconsistencies. A private investigator, hired by one of Jonathan's former business partners to investigate the accident, had started asking questions around the hospital. His name was Samuel Hayes, a man with a perpetual air of suspicion and a sharp eye for details. Emma encountered him one afternoon, reviewing Jonathan's reports in the hospital corridor. At first, she hadn't paid him much attention, thinking he was just another curious visitor. But when she overheard his name and learned who he was, she felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps, finally, someone else was willing to uncover the truth. Samuel observed her with a calculating but not hostile gaze. He knew Emma was the person who had spent the most time around Jonathan and Olivia, and if anyone had useful information, it would be her. "I know you've noticed the same thing I have," Samuel said, crossing his arms as he looked at the door to room 208. "Jonathan's accident wasn't an accident. And if we don't find out who's responsible, they'll probably try to finish what they started." Emma nodded, her heart racing. She wasn't alone. Together, maybe they could unravel the truth behind what had really happened to Jonathan and protect Olivia before it was too late. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted. It wasn't just the usual tension that filled the hallways of a place where life and death hung by a thread. This time, there was something deeper, darker. Emma felt it in every fiber of her being. Since Samuel Hayes had started asking more pointed questions, it seemed the truth was about to surface, but so was the danger. Emma had become Olivia's unofficial guardian, always watching, always worrying. The girl, though still quiet, had begun showing signs of anxiety that hadn't been there before. Sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night, crying, saying she had nightmares about her father and about a dark shadow chasing her. Emma couldn't help but wonder if those nightmares had some root in a reality they had yet to discover. One afternoon, while reviewing the latest results from Jonathan's tests, Emma noticed something. On the computer monitor, the numbers and graphs seemed normal at first glance, but there was a subtle detail, an anomaly in the levels of a specific substance in Jonathan's blood. It was a toxin that didn't correspond to any known illness or the effects of a car accident. It was a rare type of poison, one that only someone with access to highly controlled substances could have used. She stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of adrenaline surge through her body. Her worst suspicions were being confirmed. Jonathan's accident hadn't been an accident at all. Someone had tried to poison him, and they had done it so carefully that the medical team hadn't noticed right away. But who? And why? At that moment, Samuel appeared behind her, as silent as ever. "You found it, didn't you?" he said in a low, grave voice. "I knew there was something more in those tests. Something they were hiding." Emma nodded slowly, still staring at the screen. "It's a poison. Something that's not easily accessible. Whoever did this had access to means that aren't common. This wasn't a mistake or an impulsive act. It was planned." Samuel nodded, as if he had been expecting that answer. His jaw tightened as he examined the data Emma had shown him. "And the worst part is, whoever it is probably close by. Someone who had access to him after the accident, maybe someone still in his life." Emma's eyes widened. The implication was clear. They couldn't trust anyone. Rachel, with her mysterious reappearance, was at the center of their suspicions. But there was something more that didn't quite fit. Rachel seemed more interested in Olivia than in Jonathan, and that complicated the plot. If she was responsible for the poisoning, what was her real goal? Was it Jonathan, or the girl? Days after the truth about the poisoning came to light, something unexpected happened. Jonathan Wells woke up. It was in the early morning, when the hospital was just beginning to stir, that Emma, who had spent the night near his room, heard the sound of the machines changing their rhythm. Jonathan's pulse had quickened, and his brain activity levels showed significant improvement. Emma rushed to his room, her heart in her throat, and saw Jonathan blinking slowly, trying to focus his eyes. His breathing was deep and erratic, as if he were returning from a very distant place. "Jonathan," Emma murmured, stepping closer to him, her voice trembling. "You're awake." Jonathan turned his head slowly towards her, his gaze still lost and disoriented. He tried to speak, but his lips were dry and cracked, and his voice was barely a whisper. Emma leaned closer, taking his hand in hers. "Where am I?" he managed to say with effort, his voice hoarse. "You're in the hospital. You had an accident, but you're safe now." Emma fought to hold back tears of relief. She had spent so much time caring for Olivia and watching Jonathan in that vegetative state that, for a moment, she had almost lost hope that he would wake up. Jonathan frowned, as if trying to remember something crucial. His eyes moved quickly, as if searching for something in his memory. "The accident," he whispered. "It wasn't an accident." Those words, heavy with terrible meaning, confirmed what Emma already knew, but hearing Jonathan say them made it more real, more terrifying. He had been conscious, in some way, all this time. He knew what had happened to him. Before Emma could respond, the door to the room swung open. Rachel appeared, her usual haughty demeanor and air of superiority intact. Upon seeing that Jonathan had awakened, her eyes gleamed with a mixture of surprise and something else, something Emma couldn't quite identify at first. "Jonathan!" Rachel exclaimed, quickly walking toward him, her voice filled with a forced enthusiasm. "Thank God, you're finally awake." Jonathan looked at her with a mixture of confusion and distrust. "Rachel," he said slowly, as if trying to understand why she was there. "What are you doing here?" Emma watched the scene in silence, feeling the tension in the room rise with each passing second. The relationship between Jonathan and Rachel was clearly more complicated than she had imagined. But there was something else. Jonathan didn't seem relieved to see Rachel. In fact, there was a flash of alarm in his eyes, as if her presence made him uneasy. "I came as soon as I heard about your accident," Rachel said, stepping even closer to him, almost completely ignoring Emma. "I've been here, taking care of Olivia and making sure everything was fine." Jonathan interrupted her, his voice still weak but with more firmness. "Olivia, where's Olivia?" The change in his tone was immediate. Jonathan, despite being disoriented, had only one concern: his daughter. Emma realized that, although Jonathan had awakened, his mind was clearly focused on a danger only he fully understood. Something about Olivia was deeply connected to what had happened to him. As the days passed, Jonathan slowly began to regain his strength. Though still weak, his mind was sharp. One afternoon, Emma, Samuel, and Jonathan gathered privately in his room to discuss what had really happened. Jonathan leaned back against the pillows, his face pale but determined. "I remember fragments of what happened before the accident," he began, looking at Emma and Samuel with somber eyes. "I was working on something important, something related to a project called Eclipse. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe." The name echoed in the room like a silent bomb. Emma frowned, and Samuel, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened up, clearly intrigued. "Eclipse," Jonathan repeated. "It's an energy project my company was working on, but it's not just about energy, it involves something more." He paused, as if struggling to recall the details. "Olivia's DNA is the key. Something in her genetic makeup is crucial to activate the project's core. I don't know how, but someone wants to use her to access a source of energy that could change the world." The air seemed to freeze in the room. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Olivia's DNA," she repeated, incredulous. "Why is her DNA important?" Jonathan shook his head, frustration evident. "I don't know for sure, but my team discovered something in her genetic structure that could unlock the power of Project Eclipse. And there are people who would do anything to get their hands on her." Samuel, who had been listening intently, crossed his arms, his face dark. "So that accident was actually an attempt to stop you? Or maybe, to get you out of the way so they could access Olivia without your protection?" Jonathan nodded, his eyes narrowing, clearly pained by the memory. "That makes sense. They knew I wouldn't allow them to use my daughter as a key. That's why they tried to eliminate me." Emma felt dizzy. Everything she thought she knew about the situation had completely changed. It wasn't just about poisoning, or a power struggle. Olivia, the innocent child she had cared for as if she were her own, was at the center of a conspiracy that could change the course of the world. Everything fell into place when, that very night, Rachel returned to the hospital, demanding to take Olivia. She arrived with legal documents in hand, claiming that she had obtained temporary custody due to Jonathan's incapacity to care for his daughter. Emma was in the room when Rachel appeared, her face tense and her lips pressed into a thin line of determination. "This has gone on long enough," she said, tossing the papers onto Jonathan's bed. "Olivia is coming with me, for her own good." Jonathan weakly propped himself up in bed, his face pale with anger. "You can't take her, Rachel. I know what you're trying to do." Rachel looked at him with a cold, dangerous smile. "Always so predictable, Jonathan. You never knew when to give up." At that moment, Emma understood. Rachel wasn't just interested in Jonathan, she was part of the conspiracy. Maybe not the mastermind, but certainly someone with a significant role in the attempt to control Project Eclipse. Her attempts to take Olivia weren't about protecting her, but using her, to activate the secret technology that could give that organization unimaginable power. "I won't let you take her," Emma said, stepping forward, her voice firm and defiant. "I will protect Olivia, no matter what it takes." Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And what are you going to do, nurse? You have no idea what's at stake." At that moment, the door opened, and Samuel entered with 2 police officers he had called after uncovering Rachel's connections to the conspiracy. Rachel's expression changed instantly, transforming into a mask of fury and desperation. "You don't know what you're doing," she screamed as the officers approached her. "This isn't over. The organization will come for you, for all of you." With one last hateful glance at Jonathan and Emma, Rachel was escorted out of the room. The immediate danger had passed, but they knew the threat was far from over. The morning light began filtering through the hospital windows, and everything finally seemed to calm down. Jonathan Wells sat in a chair beside his bed, watching his daughter, Olivia, who was sleeping soundly in the nearby chair. The tension in the room was palpable, even though the immediate danger had passed with Rachel's arrest. But there was a shadow still looming over Jonathan, a fear he couldn't shake. Though he had regained consciousness and emerged from the coma, Jonathan couldn't help but wonder if everything that had happened had irreparably distanced him from Olivia. For years, his work had been his priority. In his effort to secure a better future for her, he had forgotten the most important thing, being present as a father. And now, as he watched her sleep, so vulnerable and small, he realized how far he had been from her for so long. With a tired sigh, Jonathan lowered his head, covering his face with his hands. The weight of guilt crushed him. "How can I make up for lost time?" he wondered silently, his heart heavy. Emma, who had been watching the scene from the doorway, decided to approach. She had spent so much time with Olivia that she felt a nearly maternal connection to her. She knew that Jonathan was dealing with more than just the poisoning and conspiracy, he was confronting the emotional void he had left in his daughter. "She needs you, Jonathan," Emma said softly, sitting next to him. "More than ever." Jonathan lifted his gaze, his eyes tired but filled with new determination. "I know I've let her down. I've been absent, wrapped up in my work, in everything but her. And now, I don't know if I can repair the damage I've done." Emma looked at him steadily. "It's never too late. Olivia doesn't need you to be perfect, she just needs you to be there for her. The fear she feels, the uncertainty, the only thing that can heal that is knowing her father is by her side." Emma's voice was gentle but firm, and those words hit Jonathan with unexpected force. He looked at Olivia again, this time with different eyes. She wasn't just a helpless child, she was his daughter. And she had needed him more than he had ever understood. Jonathan slowly approached Olivia and gently stroked her hair. The girl stirred in her sleep, as if she could feel her father's presence, and a small smile appeared on her drowsy face. In that moment, Jonathan made a silent promise, he wouldn't fail her again. As the days progressed, the calm they had achieved was fragile. The threat of the secret organization behind Jonathan's attempted murder, and that had used Rachel as a pawn, remained very real. Project Eclipse hadn't been dismantled, and as long as it existed, Olivia would be in danger. Samuel, the private investigator, had been working tirelessly to gather evidence against those responsible for the conspiracy. He had uncovered that the organization, known only as the Order, had its tentacles in multiple industries, from pharmaceuticals to advanced technology. Their goal, using Project Eclipse, wasn't just to control a new source of energy, but to monopolize it and use it to exert global power. Samuel called Jonathan and Emma into a small office he had set up in the hospital. The three of them knew they needed to act quickly before the Order made another move to capture Olivia. "We don't have much time," Samuel began, spreading out a series of documents and maps on the table before them. "Project Eclipse is nearly ready to be activated. All they need is Olivia's DNA to unlock it fully. If that happens, the consequences could be disastrous." Emma frowned, her mind trying to process the magnitude of the danger. "How can we stop them? We're just three people against an entire secret organization." Jonathan, still weak but with a new spark of resolve in his eyes, spoke firmly. "We won't let them win. If they've been after me this long, they must believe I still have something they need. We can use that to our advantage." Samuel nodded. "Exactly. We have to make them believe we're willing to hand over Olivia, but in reality, it'll be a trap." Emma looked at both men, her heart racing. She knew the plan was dangerous, but it was their only option. And what do we do when they're there? We can't take them on alone. Samuel leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with calculated intensity. We're not alone. I've got contacts in special forces and some undercover agents ready to help us, but we need to get them in the right place at the right time. Jonathan looked at Samuel, his eyes dark but filled with determination. Let's do this. This time, we face them together. The day of the confrontation had arrived. The team had prepared carefully, knowing that any mistake could cost them not only the success of the plan but also their lives. The location of Project Eclipse was in an old industrial complex, far from the city, nestled in the mountains where the order could operate without interference from the authorities. Emma and Jonathan traveled together in a rented car, with Olivia sitting in the back seat. The girl, still not fully understanding what was happening, knew something big was about to happen. Emma had spent the last few days gently explaining to her that she needed to be brave, that her father was there to protect her, and that everything would be all right. As they drove toward the complex, Olivia broke the silence. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and trembling. Jonathan looked at her through the rearview mirror. "Tell me, sweetie. Are you scared?" The question, so innocent and direct, caught Jonathan off guard. He turned slightly to look at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had been her constant companion since this all began. It was the same fear he had felt for weeks, but now, he couldn't afford to show it. "Yes, Olivia," he replied honestly, but with a firm voice. "I am scared. But the most important thing to me in this world is protecting you. And I won't let anything or anyone hurt you." Olivia stared at him for a few seconds, as if weighing those words. Then, she nodded slowly, clutching her stuffed animal, the one she had carried with her since the hospital. "I'll protect you too, Daddy," she whispered, her voice broken but determined. Jonathan felt a pang in his chest, not of fear, but of pride. He knew his daughter was scared, but he also knew she was braver than he had imagined. When they arrived at the complex, Samuel was already there, along with a small team of undercover agents ready to intervene. The plan was simple but risky, to make it seem like they were handing Olivia over to the order, while the agents infiltrated the security system to dismantle Project Eclipse from the inside. The industrial complex, massive and desolate, looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. The gray buildings and rusted chimneys contrasted with the snowy mountainous landscape. The place exuded coldness, both physically and emotionally. As they approached the entrance, they were met by a group of men from the order. One of them, a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes, stepped forward with a calculated smile. "Mr. Wells, you've finally decided to cooperate," the man said, his voice soft but threatening. "We regret having to resort to these methods, but you must understand that Project Eclipse is too important to be halted by sentimental obstacles." Jonathan clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "I just want to make sure my daughter is safe," he said, pretending to be resigned. The man from the order smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Once we're finished, no one will be hurt. Olivia will be treated with the utmost care." Emma, who had been watching the scene silently, couldn't help but feel the tension building inside her. Her protective instinct toward Olivia was at its peak, but she knew that any wrong move could ruin the entire plan. As the order's leader guided them into the complex, the undercover agents, led by Samuel, had already begun their infiltration. The room where the core of Project Eclipse was housed was protected by extreme security measures, but thanks to the information Samuel had gathered, they were able to disable the alarms without being detected. Jonathan, Emma, and Olivia were led to a central room where the order's scientists were already preparing the equipment needed to obtain Olivia's DNA sample. The girl, clinging to her father's hand, looked around with wide eyes, but she remained brave, just as Emma had told her to be. This story is truly captivating. The emotional depth, the unexpected twists, and the powerful moments of connection between the characters keep the reader engaged throughout. The combination of suspense with heartwarming moments creates a beautifully balanced narrative. Jonathan's journey from distant, work-obsessed father to a man who fully realizes the value of family is incredibly touching. The bond between him, Olivia, and Emma feels authentic and evolves in a way that resonates deeply. What really stands out is the idea of redemption and reconnection. Jonathan's determination to protect Olivia, coupled with Emma's steadfast care and love for the girl, forms the emotional core of the story. The fact that Olivia sees Emma as part of her family highlights the strength of their bond, which transcends blood ties. The action and tension, particularly during the final confrontation with the Order, provide a perfect counterbalance to the emotional scenes, making the stakes feel incredibly high and the resolution satisfying. Samuel's role as the investigator and the intricate plan to dismantle Project Eclipse add a layer of strategy that keeps readers on their toes. It's a story about healing, not just for Jonathan and Olivia but for Emma as well, as she finds her place in their lives. The way the family begins to mend, after all the chaos and danger, brings a sense of closure and hope. If you enjoyed this story full of emotions, surprises, and moments of unity, subscribe to our channel and join our family so you don't miss out on the next adventures. Your comments and opinions inspire us to keep creating content that moves you. And don't leave just yet, the next story is waiting for you on the screen. Click now and dive into another thrilling journey full of surprises.